There are moments in life when everything you believe to be real turns out to be nothing more than a carefully painted stage. I know this now. I didn't know it the morning I stood at my grandmother's graveside in my black dress, holding a single white rose so tightly that the thorns cut into my palm. I didn't even feel it. All I felt was the cold January air and the quiet understanding that the last person who had ever truly loved me without condition was gone. My grandmother, Ruth Elaine Caldwell, had lived 91 years in the same farmhouse outside Beaufort, South Carolina. She raised 3 children, mostly on her own after my grandfather passed, tended the same vegetable garden for 60 years, attended the same church every Sunday, and somehow managed to accumulate a small empire of land, rental properties, and investment accounts that no one in the family had known the full extent of until the reading of her will. The attorney said the estate was worth just over $2 million. My cousin fainted. My sister went very, very still. My name is Diana. I am 38 years old. I teach art to 4th graders at an elementary school in Beaufort, and until the day my grandmother was buried, I considered myself a reasonably happy woman. My husband, Nathan, stood beside me that morning with his hand warm against the small of my back. He had good hands, Nathan. Steady. The kind of hands that always knew where to rest at exactly the right moment. 7 years of marriage, and he still opened doors for me, still remembered my coffee order, still called me during his lunch break for no real reason other than to hear my voice. Or so I thought. My sister Renee stood on my other side, holding her own white rose and crying in that way she always cried loudly, freely, drawing attention without seeming to try. Renee was 3 years younger than me, blonde where I was dark, sharp where I was soft. We had grown up in this same town, gone to the same schools, fought over the same bathroom, and I loved her the way you love someone who has been woven into your life so long you can't imagine the fabric without them. I did not know then that she had already begun to unravel it. The attorney's office was in a building on Bay Street that smelled of old carpet and printer ink. He laid the documents across a mahogany table and went through them item by item. The farmhouse and the 42 surrounding acres went to my mother, who was ill in a memory care facility and would never fully understand what she had received. The rental property on Carteret Street, 2 investment accounts, and a life insurance policy went to me as the eldest granddaughter and primary caretaker of the estate. To Renee, grandmother had left her pearl jewelry, the antique rocking chair from the front porch, and $20,000 in a savings account. I watched my sister's face as the numbers were read aloud. She smiled. It was the smile she wore when she was waiting for something. Nathan drove me home in silence. When we pulled into the driveway, he sat for a moment without turning off the engine, staring through the windshield at nothing in particular. "We should get a financial advisor involved quickly," he said. "Something like this needs to be managed carefully." Nathan worked in finance. He had always handled our household accounts, our taxes, our retirement planning. I trusted him completely. I said that sounded like a good idea. He kissed my cheek, and I went inside to make tea. The weeks that followed were strange and gray. Grief moves through you in waves and sometimes settles like sediment in places you don't expect. I found myself crying at the grocery store over a display of peaches because my grandmother had made preserves every summer. I drove past her farmhouse on my way to school just to see the lights off in the windows. Nathan was patient. He brought dinner home on the nights I didn't have energy to cook. He sat with me while I sorted through paperwork. He suggested, gently and then a little less gently, that we meet with his colleague who specialized in estate planning. It was around that time that the small things began. I noticed them the way you notice water starting to rise slowly, so slowly that you keep telling yourself it's normal, that floors get wet sometimes, that this is nothing. Nathan started taking his phone into the bathroom. He began going into the kitchen late at night, after I'd gone to bed, and I would hear him talking in a low voice that stopped the moment I reached the bottom of the stairs. Once I asked who he'd been talking to, and he said his broker in Tokyo, different time zone. I nodded. I believed him. Renee started coming around more. This I initially took as sisterhood, as her way of helping me grieve. She brought wine and takeout and sat on my couch making me laugh about childhood memories. But there were moments when her eyes moved to Nathan with a kind of ease that made something in my chest contract. Not flirtation exactly, something more like familiarity, like two people who already know each other's rhythms. I told myself I was imagining it. Grief does strange things to your perception. Then I found the notepad. Nathan keeps a small legal pad on his nightstand for writing down ideas in the middle of the night, investment thoughts, tasks he doesn't want to forget. One evening while I was making the bed, I knocked it off the nightstand and it fell open. I picked it up and my eyes caught a line near the top of the page, written in his neat block letters. It said, "Community Property SC Rules, Check Inheritance Exclusion." I stared at it for a long moment. Then I set it back on the nightstand and sat down on the edge of the bed very carefully, the way you sit when the ground feels uncertain. In South Carolina, inherited property is not automatically marital property. An inheritance can remain solely yours unless it gets commingled with joint assets. I knew this because I had looked it up after the attorney's reading, purely out of curiosity. Nathan knew this too, apparently. He was checking the rules. He was checking the exclusions. Why would a man who had seemed nothing but supportive need to quietly look up the precise legal boundaries of his wife's inheritance? I didn't ask him about it. I put the thought in a box, closed the lid, and kept moving. I was good at that. It was my grandmother's old Bible that finally cracked me open. I had gone to the farmhouse to collect some of her personal things before the estate was formally processed. I found the Bible in the top drawer of her dresser, the leather worn smooth where her hands had held it daily for 50 years. A folded paper fell out when I lifted it. My grandmother's handwriting, shaky and small the way it had become in her last years. "Diana girl," it began, "I need you to read this and trust what I'm telling you. Nathan came to see me alone last spring, said he was bringing me some paperwork from you, but then he started asking questions about the property, about whether I had a will and who was in it, about whether you knew the full value of everything. He was too smooth, too careful. Baby, smooth and careful men scare me. Your grandfather was loud and clumsy, and I always knew exactly what he wanted. Watch out for the ones who calculate their words. I love you more than this world. Don't be anybody's fool." She had signed it with a small drawn heart, the way she always signed her birthday cards. I sat on the floor of her bedroom for a long time, reading it over and over, and the sediment of grief shifted into something harder and colder at the bottom of my chest. That night I watched my husband across the dinner table and I tried to see him the way my grandmother had seen him, smooth, careful, calculating. I had spent 7 years mistaking those qualities for steadiness, for reliability. I had thought they were the same thing. I began paying closer attention. 2 weeks later, Renee called to say she was coming for the weekend. Nathan lit up in a way I had been too distracted to notice before. He cleaned the guest bathroom without being asked. He bought wine, her brand specifically, which he claimed to have remembered from some vague family gathering, but which I now recognized as the kind of detail you remember about someone you think about often. They were careful around me, exquisitely careful. No lingering looks, no loaded silences, nothing you could point to and name. But I watched Renee's hand brush Nathan's arm when she reached past him for a glass, and I watched him go very still for exactly 1 second before he stepped back. That 1 second told me everything. That night I lay awake beside my husband and listened to him breathe. I had done this many times over 7 years, comforted by the steady rhythm of it. Now I cataloged the sound like evidence. I checked his email the next morning while he was in the shower. I felt no guilt about it. His password was our wedding anniversary, which now struck me as either deeply sentimental or deeply stupid. I found nothing conclusive in the inbox. But I found a folder he had created called Market Notes that contained no market notes at all, only emails with Renee. The earliest one was dated 14 months ago. I read them on my phone, standing in the kitchen in my bathrobe, while the coffee brewed and the morning birds started outside, and the whole ordinary world continued around me as if nothing was disintegrating. They were careful in the emails, too. Nothing explicit, but there were phrases that accumulated like evidence. I miss you. Can't wait for things to change. Once this is settled, we can finally breathe. Renee had written, what if she finds out before? And Nathan had written back, she won't. She trusts too easily, always has. She trusts too easily, always has. I closed the email. I poured my coffee. I drove to school and spent 6 hours teaching 9-year-olds how to mix colors to make the precise shade of a winter sky. I did not cry. I was thinking. I copied the emails to my own account. I took photographs of my grandmother's letter. I drove to an attorney I had found through a colleague, a woman named Ellen Marsh with a small practice and a reputation for not being easily surprised. I told her everything. She listened without expression, taking notes in a yellow legal pad. "You need to protect the inheritance first," she said. "That means a properly drafted will, and we need to make sure none of the inherited assets have been commingled with marital funds. Do you have separate accounts?" I did. My grandmother's estate had been deposited into an account in my name only. Nathan had suggested more than once that we consolidate our accounts for simplicity. I had agreed in theory and never gotten around to doing it. Now I was grateful for my own disorganization. Ellen drafted a will. Everything to a charitable trust benefiting arts education in Beaufort County. Nathan would receive nothing. She kept 2 signed copies. I kept one in a safe deposit box along with printed copies of the emails. I was building a wall, brick by brick, before the storm hit. I just didn't know how close the storm already was. Nathan suggested a weekend trip the first week of February. Said I needed to get out of my head, away from the grief and the paperwork and the weight of everything. He had reserved a cabin on Lake Marion, about 2 hours north. Just the 2 of us, he said. Fire in the fireplace, nowhere to be. Something warned me. It was quiet and specific, that warning like a change in air pressure before rain. But I went. I went because I needed to know what he was planning, and because I had a plan of my own beginning to take shape. We drove up on a Friday afternoon. The lake was gray and still. The cabin was exactly what he had described, warm and isolated, down a dirt road that branched off from the main highway with no other structures visible in any direction. My phone had 1 bar of service. Nathan seemed relaxed in a way I had not seen in months. He grilled steaks. He opened a good bottle of wine. He told old stories from early in our marriage and laughed at the right moments. I laughed too. I was a better actor than I had known. On Saturday morning, he suggested we take the kayaks out. The rental place had left 2 of them on the dock. The lake was calm, the air cold and clean. I wore my life jacket. Nathan wore his for exactly 11 minutes, then took it off and laid it in the bottom of his kayak, saying it was rubbing his neck. We paddled out to the middle of the lake. I remember thinking about how the water looked almost black from where I sat, how the pine trees on the far shore were perfectly reflected, how still everything was. Nathan said he needed to check his phone and reached for the paddle, and then the world tilted. My kayak flipped. The cold hit me so hard it felt like a solid wall. I went under, came up gasping, and in those first seconds of shock I did not think anything except cold, cold, cold. Then I looked at Nathan. He was watching me from his kayak with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Not panic, not reaching for me, just watching, with a kind of focused attention, the way you watch something you are waiting to confirm. He thought the cold water would do it. That's what I understood, looking at his face. He had flipped my kayak deliberately. He knew the water temperature. He knew how fast hypothermia can set in. He knew we were far from shore and that I had been tired and not sleeping well, and that the shock might simply be enough. I made a decision in about 2 seconds. I went limp. Not immediately, I thrashed first, convincingly, the way a person does, gasping and calling his name. Then I let my body go slack, and my face tilt toward the water, holding my breath, keeping my eyes closed. The life jacket kept me on the surface. I was rigid with cold, but I was not dead. I heard Nathan paddle closer. I felt his hand on my shoulder, rolling me slightly, checking. My heart was hammering so hard I was certain he could hear it. I held myself absolutely still. He spoke quietly, almost to himself. Okay. Then he took out his phone. The call connected after 2 rings. Renee's voice, small and distant but clear in the silence over the water. "Is it done?" My husband said. "She went in. Looks like she hit her head on the kayak when she fell. She's not responsive." A pause. Then Renee. "Nathan, are you sure?" "We can't." "I'm sure," he said. "The cold will take care of the rest. I'll wait a few minutes and then call for help." Tragic accident. Her kayak flipped. I tried to get to her in time but couldn't. Renee was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller. And the estate? Goes to me as the spouse. No children, no will that we know of. It's straightforward. Okay, Renee said. And then softer, I love you. I love you too, Nathan said. I'll call you when it's over. I floated on my back in 40-degree water and listened to my husband tell my sister he loved her while he waited for me to die. Every cell in my body was screaming. Every instinct was telling me to kick, to fight, to scream until someone on shore heard. But I held still. I held still because I understood, with perfect cold clarity, that my only advantage was that he did not know I was alive. He waited. I counted in my head. When I got to 90, he made the second call, his voice shifting into something fractured and frightened, the performance beginning. I need help. I'm on Lake Marion. My wife fell out of her kayak. I can't, please. Send someone. When the sound of a motor approached from the direction of the marina, I let myself make a sound. A small one. Enough. The man from the marina reached me first. He pulled me over the side of his boat with strong arms, wrapping me in a foil blanket, calling for the ambulance he'd already requested. I was shaking so hard my teeth cracked together. He was talking to me, but I couldn't track the words, only the warmth beginning to creep back into my fingers. Nathan's kayak appeared alongside. He was crying. Real tears, I'll give him that. His face crumpled in all the right ways. He reached for my hand and I let him take it, lying on the floor of that stranger's boat, and I looked up at the white sky and thought about my grandmother's handwriting. Don't be anybody's fool. I was not dead. And I was not a fool. Not anymore. The hospital in Sumter kept me overnight for observation. Mild hypothermia, a bruised shoulder, no serious damage. Nathan sat beside my bed for hours, holding my hand, crying at intervals. The nurses told him what a devoted husband he was. I watched his performance and filed it away. He did not know what I had heard. That was the only thing that mattered. I lay in the hospital bed and finished building my plan. My first call the next morning was to Ellen Marsh. I told her what had happened in short, careful sentences. She told me not to go back to the house alone. She said the word we had both been avoiding. Police. I told her I needed one more piece before I was ready for that. She was not happy. She told me to be careful. I told her I would. Nathan drove me home from the hospital with one hand on my knee the entire way, glancing over at me with an expression of such practiced concern that I almost admired the craft of it. 7 years. He had been doing this for 7 years. At home, I told him I needed to rest. He set me up on the couch with blankets and pillows and a cup of tea. He kissed my forehead. Then he went into his office and closed the door, and I heard him, very quietly, on the phone again. I had hidden my phone in the blankets. I was already recording. I couldn't make out his words clearly, but I heard enough. Renee's name. Not yet. She's still here. A long pause. Then, we may need to think about another approach. Another approach. I turned the recording off and lay very still on the couch, looking at the ceiling, thinking about what my grandmother had built over 91 years and what my husband planned to do with it, and what my sister had already traded away for a man who would use up everyone around him and keep moving. The next morning, while Nathan was at the gym, I called Renee. She answered on the first ring, which told me she'd been waiting. "Diana," she said. "God, I was so scared when Nathan called. Are you okay?" "I need you to come over," I said. "I need my sister." A short pause. "Of course. I'll be there in an hour." I set the phone on the kitchen table and sat down and pressed my hands flat against the wood until they stopped shaking. She arrived before Nathan got back, which I had counted on. I let her in. She was wearing a soft gray sweater and her hair was down, and she looked so much like the girl I had grown up with that for a moment the grief I felt had nothing to do with my grandmother at all. We sat at the kitchen table with coffee I had already poured, and I looked at my sister and I asked, "How long?" She knew immediately what I was asking. I watched the blood drain from her face. "Diana." "How long, Renee?" She set her mug down very carefully. "Almost 14 months, she said, "since last January." She started to explain a work event she'd attended with Nathan while I was at a teacher conference. Wine, one thing leading to another. I know it's not an excuse, and I held up one hand and she stopped. I need you to listen to me very carefully, I said, because what I'm about to tell you changes everything. I told her what I had heard on the lake. I told her slowly and precisely, watching her face change. The color came back and then drained again. By the time I reached the part where Nathan said the cold will take care of the rest, her hands were shaking visibly on the table. He told you he said that to me while he thought I was dead, Renee. He was waiting for me to die, and you said okay. I didn't think he would actually, she stopped. But you didn't stop him, I said. She was crying now. Silently, which was unlike her. The loudness had gone out of her. I thought he meant, I don't know what I thought. He told me it would be clean, that it was just about money, that you two had already been growing apart, and he was never going to be with you, I said. You understand that, don't you? You understand that a man who will plan his wife's death will plan anything. She put her face in her hands. Here's what's going to happen, I said. You're going to write down everything, every conversation, every plan he shared with you, every date and detail you can remember. Then you're going to come with me to the police, and you're going to cooperate with everything they ask. And if I do, her voice was muffled, then I will ask the prosecutor to take your cooperation into account. That's all I can offer you. She was quiet for a long time. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked once and then went silent. I'm so sorry, Diana, she said finally. Not the frantic apology she might have offered before, just quiet, stripped down, like something scraped to the bone. I know, I said. And I did know. But knowing is not the same as forgiving, and forgiving was not something I had to decide about that morning. Nathan came home 40 minutes later to find his wife and her sister sitting at the kitchen table, and whatever he read on our faces made him stop in the doorway with his gym bag still on his shoulder. We need to talk, I said. He sat. He tried his various faces, confused, concerned, willing to listen. I let him try them all. Then I placed my phone on the table and pressed play. He heard himself on the water. She went in. Looks like she hit her head on the kayak. He heard Renee's voice asking if it was done. He heard himself say, the cold will take care of the rest. When I stopped the recording, the kitchen was completely silent, except for the refrigerator hum. I also have your emails, I said. Ellen Marsh has copies of everything. A second copy is in a safe deposit box. A third is with someone I trust, and she will go straight to the police if anything happens to me. There is no version of this where you win, Nathan. He looked at Renee. She looked at the table. The police won't, he started. We're going to the police, I said. Both of us. Right now. Renee has agreed to give a full statement. I watched him understand that it was over. The various faces cycled through one more time and then fell away, and what was left underneath was something I had never seen in 7 years of marriage. A man with nothing left to perform. He stood up slowly. For one moment I was afraid. I had planned for this, told Ellen where I was, left a note with my neighbor, but he didn't move toward me. He moved toward the back door, and he would have walked out, I think, except that the 2 patrol cars were already in the driveway because I had called the police department before I called Renee. The officers were patient and thorough. They took statements in separate rooms. A detective from the county sheriff's office arrived within the hour. By evening, Nathan was in custody, charged with attempted murder. The investigation would later confirm what Renee told them. He had researched water temperature at Lake Marion, had checked hypothermia onset times, had mapped the route to ensure isolation. The kayak had not malfunctioned. He had used his paddle to catch the underside of mine at exactly the right angle. Patient, careful, calculated. My grandmother had seen it in his eyes the first time she met him. The trial was 8 months later. I sat in the front row of the courtroom and watched Nathan in the defendant's chair and tried to find something in myself that still resembled the woman who had loved him. I couldn't find her. I think she had gone under the water on that lake and not come back up, and I was not sorry. He was convicted on all counts. 19 years. Renee received a suspended sentence and 3 years of probation for her cooperation. She stood outside the courthouse afterward in the gray October air, thinner than she had been, older looking. She didn't try to come to me. She just looked at me from across the parking lot for a long moment, and then she got into her car and drove away. I don't know when I'll be ready to talk to her. I'm not there yet. Maybe I will be eventually, and maybe I won't be, and I've made peace with not knowing. In the spring, I moved into my grandmother's farmhouse. I spent 2 weeks cleaning every room, washing every window, letting the cold air out and the warm air in. I planted the vegetable garden the way she had shown me when I was 6, tomatoes and pole beans and 3 kinds of squash. I hung her photographs back on the walls exactly where they had been. I kept her Bible on the nightstand. I went back to teaching. My 4th graders made a card for me on the first day. They had heard I had been through something hard, the way children always seem to know, and it said, "We missed you, Miss Diana," in 18 different colors. I taped it to my classroom wall and looked at it every morning. I used the first portion of the inheritance to establish an arts scholarship at the local high school in my grandmother's name. Ruth Elaine Caldwell had believed that beauty was not a luxury. She had kept flowers on her table every week of her life, regardless of what the budget looked like. I wanted her name to mean something in this town for a long time. There are nights I still wake up in the middle of the dark and feel the cold of that lake pressing against me. I lie still and breathe and let it pass. It passes faster now than it used to. I found a letter my grandmother had left tucked inside the back cover of her Bible, short, just a few lines, in her small, careful handwriting that had shaken more toward the end. "My Diana," she wrote, "don't let anyone make you small. Don't let anyone take what you've built. And if someone tries, you remember you've got my blood in you, and my blood doesn't quit. I'll be watching. I'll be proud. All my love, forever. Grandma Ruth." I read it on a Thursday evening in April, with the windows open and the smell of fresh soil coming in from the garden and the last of the light going golden across the floors she had walked for 60 years. I cried the way I hadn't let myself cry in months, fully, loudly, without performing anything for anyone. When I was done, I folded the letter back into the Bible. Then I went outside and checked on the tomatoes. They were doing beautifully.